Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Am I loud and clear for everybody? I think so, eh? Thank you very much for being here tonight, the evening about diversity matters. We have a beautiful title for tonight's program. It's called New Challenges for the Art Museum of the Future. Are we still contemporary? Changing perspective as part of the program. In the past, museums were often funded by the state, there to educate it, mostly about colonial victories, you could say, about inventions, about history lessons. But today, museums are far more independent and they have their very own position in society. You could say they feel more us, so to speak. My name is Daverschot. I'm a moderator. I moderate events, mostly in my home country, Holland. But today I'm very happy to be here in Germany. I do speak German, but to speak an entire evening in German, for me, that's a little bit too challenging. Please forgive me. But I would like to tell to you, if tonight you have any questions, feel free to post them either in English or in German, because most of what you're saying I fully understand. We also have an international guest tonight. She will be using headphones, so every now and then if there's German feedback, let's say, then it will be translated by a translator as well who is backstage, just so you know. Yeah, and I thought maybe it's nice to also have a little chat with our neighbor, because we might not know each other as we sit here tonight. So I thought maybe it's interesting to have a little exchange of experiences, because I'm curious to hear from you. What has been the latest museum that you've been visiting? I see people laughing already and thinking like, what was the last museum I've been visiting? Take a minute or so and have a little chat with your neighbor, and then I'd love to hear some thoughts in a few minutes. So it sounds like you've been visiting a lot of museums, because I hear a lot of people chatting. Maybe ladies, can I ask you, what has been the latest museum that you've been visiting?
I've been visiting K21.
K21, that is close by.
That's quite close by, yes.
Yeah. And what did you see in K21?
The exhibition of Chow Fei.
Chow Fei, yeah. And did you like it?
Yes, I like it.
Yeah, very good, good. Mm-hmm. Okay, nice to hear. Maybe some, madam, can I ask you, what has been the latest museum, das letztes museum?
This one, at the opening of this actual exhibition, okay. And afterwards it was Volkwang Museum.
Okay. So you already seen Museum Global?
Oh, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did you like it?
Oh, very much.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Very interesting.
Thank you so much. Maybe on the back row here, madam, can I ask you what has been the latest museum that you've been visiting?
I'm super sorry, but I don't remember. I know that it has not been long ago, but I'm really kind of trying to get my thoughts together, but I'm sure it was, I think it was in Germany.
If all of a sudden tonight you think like, I know
it,
then
I will point
okay?
up.
Okay, very good. Well, and maybe one last question before we start off. Talk with the other neighbor, because there's often somebody sitting on the other side as well. What is the museum that we definitely need to see? So maybe there's a museum that you think, oh, I've been there once. That was so great. It was so beautiful. You should really go there. Make sure that you tell your neighbor, yeah? Well, a lot of tips are being exchanged. Let me check over here. Madam, can I ask you, what has been the museum that your neighbor was telling you that was really great? Did you remember?
I was talking and not my neighbor.
You were talking. No worries, no worries. You probably had a good idea.
I said that I wanted to visit the MMK in Frankfurt.
MMK in Frankfurt,
yes,
yeah.
And I don't know the name of the exhibition, but it's something with migration.
Okay,
and I want to see it.
Interesting. You can slowly close your conversation. Let's hear a few more tips and tricks all the way down here, madam. What is the museum that we should definitely go to? Do you know?
I have to think about it.
You have to think about it.
We have been chatting, so I was
No worries,
sorry.
no worries. Okay, well, for sure, you've been inspired by your neighbors to hear what is an interesting museum to visit. So after today, you can go and book your trips to wherever in Germany or maybe around the world. So this evening is made possible by two organizations, the Kunstsammlung, but also the Zukunftsakademie. And the two organizations have a few words for us. So I first like to ask Ines Bogart, she is director of the Zukunftsakademie. An applause for Ines.
Ich mache es auf Deutsch. Alle herzlich willkommen heute Abend. Wir freuen uns wirklich auch, dass Sie alle gekommen sind heute Abend. Und ich bin die Geschäftsführerin der Zukunftsakademie Nordrhein-Westfalen mit Sitz in Bochum, aber wir sind auch gerne irgendwo anders zu Hause. Heute Abend hier in der Kunstsammlung NRW. Und wir freuen uns auf die Kooperation. Julia Hagenberg wird noch etwas dazu sagen später an. Und wir fangen heute an mit einer Diskussion. Sie wissen alle, mehr als 25% der Einwohner von Nordrhein-Westfalen haben irgendeine Art von diverser Migrationsgeschichte. Und für uns ist die große Frage für heute Abend zu diskutieren, welchen Einfluss hat das schon genommen, nimmt das und wird es auch in der Zukunft nochmal auf zum Beispiel Museen nehmen können, wollen, sollen. Das ist eine große Frage, glaube ich auch. Ja, wir freuen uns, dass Sie alle hier sind. Es gibt noch mehrere Diskussionen innerhalb des Programms vom Museum Global. Da wird auch die Julia Hagenberg noch auch darüber erzählen. Und wir hoffen uns auch nochmal am 23. Januar noch eine weitere Diskussion zu haben können hier im Open Space. Ich wünsche uns und euch allen einen schönen Abend.
Guten Abend auch von meiner Seite. Ich darf Sie heute im Namen der Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen, im Namen von Frau Professor Gensheimer ganz herzlich willkommen heißen. Mein Name ist Julia Hagenberg. Ich leite die Abteilung Bildung hier im Haus, habe gemeinsam mit meinen Kollegen und den Kollegen aus der Abteilung Wissenschaft, den Kuratorinnen, diesen Ort hier gemeinsam entwickelt, zusammen mit vielen Partnern, eben auch zusammen mit der Zukunftsakademie NRW. Und ich bedanke mich wirklich ganz herzlich bei Ines Bogarts und Sandra Schewonka für dieses großartige gemeinsame Vorhaben hier. Heute ein Titel, der hier aufschien, war der Perspektivwechsel, der hier eben ein Titel dieses Abends ist. Und das ist die Verknüpfung, die auch in die Ausstellung hineinreicht. Warum haben wir diesen Open Space? Warum diskutieren wir heute Abend über Diversity? Und was hat das eigentlich auch mit unserer Sammlung zu tun? Die Ausstellung Museum Global widmet sich ja verschiedenen Mikrogeschichten in verschiedenen Regionen des Globus und unseres Globus. Und sie widmet sich dem Thema der Öffnung. Wie ist unsere Sammlung bisher ausgerichtet und wer ist repräsentiert, welche Künstler sind vielleicht und Künstlerinnen sind vielleicht auch nicht repräsentiert und sind eben in dieser Ausstellung nun zu sehen und welche Verbindungen gibt es hinein in diese Sammlung. Dieses Thema der Öffnung ist eben auch eins, was nicht nur sozusagen sich mit unseren Inhalten beschäftigt, sondern in Verbindung mit dieser Ausstellung widmen wir uns auch der Frage unseres Publikums und der Frage, sind wir da noch zeitgemäß? Das ist die Frage von heute Abend. Inwiefern ist die Frage der Diversität bei uns im Programm und in unseren Inhalten im Personal ausreichend berücksichtigt. Ich freue mich sehr, dass wir heute Abend mit Ngaire Blankenberg darüber diskutieren dürfen, mit Yilmaz. Ich freue mich sehr über die Gäste. Vielen Dank auch an die Moderation. Robert Daverschot, ist ein großes Vergnügen. Wir werden viel dabei lernen. Wir haben heute Nachmittag schon die Gelegenheit gehabt, zusammen mit verschiedenen Kollegen aus anderen Museen über das Thema Diversität mit Ngaire Blankenberg zu diskutieren. Es war wirklich außerordentlich interessant und ich freue mich auf die Fortsetzung heute Abend hier. Vielen Dank.
Yeah, thank you very much. So diversity matters, and how does that relate to museums? This museum, but in general museums around the country here in Germany. Obviously, there's many perspectives that you can look at it and talk about it, but we thought it would be interesting to take 3 perspectives tonight. So the first perspective would be, let's say, internally. So if you are a museum, how then do you compose a collection? What do you think about? What are focus points, points of interests in relation to diversity, obviously? Then the second theme that we would like to address is externally. So what does the audience have to say if it concerns diversity in museums? Do they have something to say or not? We don't know. And the last perspective is, what will diversity mean in relation to museums for the future? What are important ingredients that we have to take into account? Before I introduce the guests, I'd like to give you a brief setup on how we discuss these topics. Every time I will open a theme, let's say, with a short word, but every time there's also a statement, and I will ask you to either agree or disagree by raising your hands. And by that, we also would like to hear, obviously, your thoughts, because there's not only very interesting people here on the front row, but also your opinion and your experience is very valuable and also helps to both organizations that were presenting a minute ago to further form their thoughts and vision. So if that's okay, I would like to do it like that. And then, of course, I'm very delighted to introduce 2 special guests tonight. There's a museum director, which is really helpful, of course, in this discussion. And there is a museum advisor who've seen more than one museum, so to speak, and she has been advising them a lot. So to start with the last person, she calls herself a museum doctor. Don't you find that a beautiful word? When I heard it, I thought like, wow, a museum doctor. She also calls herself a storyteller. She has lived around the globe. She advised more than 30 museums in major cities around the world. She's a proud mom of 2 children. She has a beautiful dog, a beagle, one of my favorite dogs. They're very funny. Can I have a warm applause for Ngaire Blankenberg? Take a seat, yeah. Yes, thank you so much for being here. And of course, we have another guest. He studied art history and archaeology in Bonn and London. He was, for a few years, director at the Kunsthaus Bregenz in Hamburg. And since 2015, he is director at Museum Ludwig in Cologne. And as I've briefly got to know him, he is an eager ambassador for diversity. Can I have a warm applause for Dr. Yilmaz Dwiezior? Yeah, I've already talked about the setup for this discussion and also with you, obviously. I will also take a little seat for now before I dive into the audience again. Don't be afraid. If we're discussing, and I will put the right slide also behind us. Yeah, if we're talking about a museum from the inside, let's say, and how they compose an exposition. For you, of course, that's daily practice. You know very well how to compose a collection, I would say. But I can imagine that in the audience, people are curious, how is an idea born? And how, in general, do you bring it into practice?
So I guess my task to answer this. Yeah, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's very nice to be here. And also the workshop this afternoon was very nice. Also, thank you very much to Ngaire. She put the finger in the wound, so to say.
Yeah, maybe good to elaborate, because this afternoon Ngaire gave a workshop to a group of museum directors about cultural diversity. So that is what you refer to, I believe. Yeah.
So the question how an idea is developed into an exhibition is, of course, rather the answer naturally is very sort of like complex, or not one answer to this question. The thing is, you know, talking from the point of an institution, it's always, I would say, sort of like a teamwork, which for me is very important. And the other thing is, I know from a lot of sort of like younger curators or curators who study art history and want to become a curator or a director, I think they have like a totally different perspective of what actually then as a director and also as a curator you really expect that, I mean, or what you really live, because it is really that you don't sit at the office and then, you know, to think and to... That is actually very, I think a lot of the curators and also for me as a director, it's an overall experience which then leads to certain decisions, which leads, and also this workshop for today, for example, will also inform my practice and it will inform the practice of my colleagues. So it's, I would say, a decision or an idea comes from experience, from knowledge, from exchange, and out of these more abstract speaking informations, something is developed, and then there you can have like the best idea. If you can't practically realize this best idea in the team, talking about funding, talking about does it make sense in this institution at this time? So there are so many questions at the point. So it's not, you can't give sort of like one answer, oh, you have the idea and then you go A, B, C, D. Yeah. But it's more that the curatorial team, each of the curatorial team in relation to the other departments, with education, with public relation, sort of like, I mean, there's first an idea, I would say, maybe by one person, but then it's quite a process till this idea develops to a more concrete concept and then develops to a presentation and then is out there.
Do you recognize that process, Ngaire?
I do, and I think it's a process that probably needs to change a little bit.
Okay.
And I think that it's an extremely interesting question, because I think what most people don't recognize is how big museum institutions can be under the surface. They're a little bit like an iceberg. So I think the public comes and sees an exhibition, which is only a tiny portion a lot of the time with the collection, and a tiny portion of what the museum itself does. And underneath it, it's a whole process of decision-making, of validations, of co-validations, of framing of knowledge that are actually not public-facing at all, which I think are quite interesting. And I think in the context of diversity, that is a really good question. Who decides what the subject of an exhibition is? How do they decide? Yeah. And how is that exhibition then framed? And I would argue, and I mean, I work advising museums all over the world, and my job is to promote positive things that work. But because I'm sitting on a panel, I can be more radical right now. So everything I say now, take with a bit of a grain of salt, because I do like museums. But I think that that a lot of the times the process of exhibition creation does not take into account enough contemporary issues, issues of importance, or even issues that are of relevance to the audience. Yeah. I mean, I think that they're justified as being relevant to audiences, but I think that on the whole, a lot of people actually don't really know what audiences want or who the audiences even are. And I think that's a bit of a challenge.
Would you say it's the privilege of the museum director and his close companions, so to speak, to think on a Wednesday afternoon, hey, maybe this is an interesting topic, and over time you discuss that in a phone call, during a dinner, and then you have an idea? Is that how it works, or is that too naive?
Well, I think there's a lot of work that goes into it, but I think that within the museum, I mean, museums institutionally are organized a particular kind of way. So I think there's typically the curators, and the curators are in charge of understanding, for the most part, the collection. Right? So they do research around the collection, and most of the time the curatorial team presents an idea for a particular exhibition based on a collection, if the museum has a collection. Museums also have a public education arm who may or may not be involved in the name of the collection. And then there's also a number of other people, the internal staff, there can be an outreach team, there can be publications, whatever, depends on how big the museum is. So different museums are set up different ways. Smaller museum, it's more of a collaborative decision. Yep. Bigger museums, it comes a lot of the time, I think, from the curators, right? The curatorial staff with the director or independently will often present an idea, and the director most of the time will have the final say, but often in tension with the curators.
Yep. And the curators, just to make things clear, they are not often part of the actual museum, and they are freelance.
No, I think it depends on the museum.
Depends.
I think there's a trend to have freelance curators, but I think probably in Germany most of them are staff.
We have very few. I mean, we mostly work with our team.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, well, you already gave a little hint on that process of how a collection is being shaped, that maybe can be done a bit differently. If we now relate it to tonight's theme about diversity, I would like to pose a statement, which I will put on the screen. So, and I give you a minute to read it, and I will also read it out loud to you. So, the quality of an artwork should be leading when composing an art collection, not the background, ethnicity, religion, gender, or sexual orientation of the artist. Before I give the floor to you guys, I'm very curious what the audience thinks, and if I can maybe borrow for one moment. Can I have some hands? Who agrees with this statement? Who says yes? The quality of an artwork should be leading when you when you make a collection. Yeah, a few. Okay. And who says no? The background of an artist should be leading when composing a collection. Okay, interesting. Maybe I can ask you, madam, why do you think the background of an artist is so important?
I agree to the whole sentence in general, but the question is what quality is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how you define quality and etc. For example, in terms of gender, I mean, there are many people, there are many men around who say, okay, female art is not as good as male art. So, I mean, that's where it starts, the problem.
Yeah, indeed. Definitions already. Who agreed with indeed the quality of the work is leading? I believe you, sir, were raising your hand.
Yes, I agree to the main idea behind it, although I know it is difficult to qualify what is quality. Yeah. But I think we need this decision-making of quality.
Yeah. It's a very black and white question, obviously, but that's also the thought behind statements. If we're talking about diversity and if you want to make museums more diverse, so to speak, what has been your experience so far, Yilmaz? Is it indeed that you look at the quality of a work, or by now are you also interested, hey, who was that woman? Where did she come from? What was her story? And maybe therefore we should choose her work instead of, let's say, his work.
I think it's the wrong opposition. I think it's the same. There is this argumentation, form versus content, for example. I would say the wrong attitude or the wrong way to approach it. And what we learned already today, and what I was aware, but I think it's good to pronounce it in this sentence. I think Ngaire, what she will say herself, but I think she would say that we use the weapon, the expertise, or the scientific knowledge or quality, that's, I think, what, as a weapon or tool or shield to exclude other participants we may are afraid of, or we may unconsciously maybe do not include because of structural reasons. So I think the question, I would not go on this tricky territory to say, quality or background. But to be more concrete, I think, for example, we that means the curatorial team, we are interested in certain questions. And parts of these questions are also is diversity. That's why I'm here. That's why I participate at the workshop. So that is something we think it's crucial for our work. And so I think we may would not use the word quality, though in this institution here, from the history of the institution, it's very apt, because as we all know, Werner Schmalenbach was known for selecting the most quality. I think we would not approach it from this question of quality, but we would more approach it from what seems relevant to us. And I think it would go for granted, and I think we will argue about this later, that I think we choose, and I'm aware of this, and I think our team also, from what we know. Yep. That means, and I'm aware of this. So I would say, but we know a lot now, because it's the time also now, from different backgrounds. So I think, and that's where maybe the problem starts, because we are aware of what is the current discourse, and we are interested in a broad spectrum of positions from all different, what does it says there, from all different background, ethnicity, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. We are interested in also these different fields, but still I am aware, and I think also the team is aware, that we select from what we know. And I think maybe that's your point also, that is already where the problem starts, that it is sort of like an inner circle, and who is allowed to speak and who is allowed to participate.
Yeah. You agree with that, I see, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like saying, you know, we discovered America.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think quality and diversity can exist together.
No, I understand, but I can also imagine that you've identified a theme of your collection, and in front of you there's 3 works, 2 of white, male, heterosexual artists, and 1 of another profile, let's say. At the end of the day, you have to choose. So I understand that you define it as broad as possible, but I just wonder how it works for a museum director or a curator when making a collection. You have to make choices.
Yeah, and I think on that, I think the role of the patron is very important. I used to work at a company called Lord Cultural Resources, and the founders, Gail and Barry Lord, wrote a book called Artist, Public, and the Patron, or Artist, Public, Patrons were all 3 there. And what they pointed out, and which I think is really important, is that the collector is extremely important in leading cultural change. So I think right now what you see is a lot more patrons, a lot more collectors from the Middle East. You see a lot more collectors from China at the moment. And consequently, what you're seeing is a huge explosion in recognition or exhibitions all over the world, from Chinese artists, from Arab artists, from Lebanese artists, from Moroccan artists, etc. Where you see, when you see the patrons, the people who have control over buying or supporting artists, when they're different and their priorities are different, the collection changes. And I don't think there would be anyone here who would say that the quality of those Chinese artists is inferior in any way, shape, or form. It's just that the priorities are different. So I think it depends on whether you're starting a collection, a museum from scratch, or whether you're not. I mean, there's a lot of museums that are starting from scratch, and we can look at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, for example, kind of from scratch, or we can look at like museums in China, or we can look at all the new museums in Europe, and we can see that the criteria for collecting is very different than in the past.
Would you call these new collectors disruptive?
Well, disruptive to whom?
To, let's say, the established museums in, for instance, Europe?
Sure, to Europe. I mean, I think
I wouldn't say necessarily disruption. I would say more expanding.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, Europe has presented itself as the world for a long time. Europe's not the world, it's a tiny little continent somewhere in the world. There's a whole big world out there. Widening the circle could be considered disruptive, or it could just be considered, you know, global.
Yeah. Yilmaz, to what extent are you involved with, let's say, these new collectors that obviously also, to an extent, set trends and new visions?
I think what Ngaire just described, I totally understand, but not from a German perspective in this drastic impact like it has in the US, because, and that's something we should really have high value of, that we are not privately driven, but that we are city paid or state paid, or so the movement which you correctly described is less, I don't say it's not concerning us, but the influence of the collectors or of a board, we don't have a private board, is much lesser. It's there, I would say, but it's not as obvious as you describe it.
I agree, but I think that it speaks to the issue of quality. Because when you say you're not aware of certain artists, what makes you aware of them?
And I don't think it's necessarily collectors, sorry.
No,
it's
I don't
really,
think it's collectors, but I think it's, if there's no one to pay for those artists to somehow get exhibited somewhere, you're never going to hear of them. You know, and so I think that a lot of the times what happens, it's either collectors or it's other patrons, other museums, private museums, whatever, who basically recognize the worth of another artist. That artist starts to build its reputation, and then possibly the German museum's like, oh yeah, this is quality, we're going to expand our exhibition, our collection to include this artist.
I would like to disagree at least in 2 points.
Okay.
First, I would say, I think it's problematic that you really jump on this term quality.
Yes.
Because I think it's, A, it's not interesting, I would say, and B, it's not the, if you think in these terms, you're 19th century, or you're not, it's not equivalent to our contemporary state, I would say. And B, I think you underestimate the knowledge or the experience or the network or the communication of curators, they can be freelance, of critics. There are so many more participants in this field we're working on. And I think to repeat and repeat the dominance of the collector, that empowers them more. And I see them, I'm not naive, I know they're there, but I think it's also simplifying, sorry, but it's to quote it like you did, because that's feuilleton. You know, you open up the paper and that's exactly what you read in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and so on, and it's not really our experience leading an institution or a curator, and I also mean for critics and I mean for other people being part of this. I think it's underestimating their role, and it's overestimating the role of the collector.
And I agree with the issue of quality, and I think I meant to say, I thought I said patron, not collector, necessarily. And I think the difference is that public museums can also be patrons. I mean, so I think when you see the growth of museums elsewhere, elsewhere out of Europe, they're also patrons, even if they're state-funded. And the other point I would like to say is I don't underestimate, in fact, the work and the networks and the amazingness of, I think, a lot of curators who do remarkable work. Yep. But I think that we exist within a politically economic reality where there are some places in the world where there are no arts press. The publication of the work is not, I mean, it's not even digitized. I mean, we have museums whose work, I mean, you know, who don't even have the facilities to digitize any of their collection. We have a huge inequity in terms of just access to the communication challenges so that you can even discover the journals, the press, the critics, the publishers, the printing papers, I mean, photographers can't even like get their work printed in any kind of quality in some places in the world. Not to say their work is not of quality. So I think we do have to also acknowledge that, that there is an uneven dynamic in the art world.
But if you, because you're very much, of course, representing the European or better the German situation, and of course it's different from Asia, Middle East, and the US, obviously. Would you say building a more diverse museum is easier in the German situation where there's so many more stakeholders often involved?
I mean, it depends how you describe diverse, and it depends if diversity as such is something good or bad. Yeah. You know, we heard from Ngaire, the US is now very diverse in the sense of that a lot of African American collectors become to power or are part of the board of institutions, and then you see more, let's say, African American art in the collection of big institutions, and but I'm not sure actually. I mean, is this the right way we want to go? And I don't. It's different. I would not dare to say it's more easy here, but yeah. There are different challenges. Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, for example, I know a lot of institutions in the US. They have a much bigger outreach team. For example, we can dream in our institution. Our education department is so much smaller than bigger American institution because it's part of their. So I wouldn't say. I mean, it's more easy. It's just it's a different way of trying to be more diverse or trying to
I think what is the same in every museum, no matter if it's in Germany or where else in the world, is the team in a museum. To what extent is it important that the entire team is behind the choice of a collection, and in this case, a collection that represents diversity? Or would you say?
I would. I mean, I can't. I would not dare to say. Our team. They are all individuals, and they're not all behind. Our collect. I mean. I know the weakness. I mean, I think it's a great and strong collection, but I know the weak point of our collection, and so I think I would feel uncomfortable to say, "Oh, I'm 100% behind the collection," and also the team is 100% behind the collection. I think there is a general high identification from the team with the institution they're working for, but at the same time they have also that's what we talk about, the critical awareness, where there are the things missing, where are the weak points of the institution, also of the collection.
But do you, for instance, if you start a new collection or if you present a new collection towards your team, do you have discussions about it, or do you evaluate after a given moment how it went and how it was perceived also through their eyes?
Absolutely. I mean, we all of us, but this is the curatorial team, and I think that's something you would question. The curatorial team does the decision what is acquired, what is going to be acquired, and this is a discussion. But at the same time, it is a power thing. I mean, I am aware that as a director, it's also, I would say, it's my responsibility. You would call this maybe a shield. I'm protecting myself for other things. But my responsibility, to be responsible what we acquire and what we do not acquire.
Yeah. Maybe, by the way, can you sit a bit, because the connection with the laptop, sorry for that. Yeah, disruptive, that's the right word. Yeah. Ngaire, can I ask you, how important is it to have the entire museum team behind a collection if you want to put diversity strongly on the map, so to speak?
Well, I mean, I think the collection isn't everything. The collection really isn't everything, and it's not necessarily everything when it comes to an exhibition. I mean, I think that a museum it's really important to recognize that a museum, and especially a museum today, is far more than its collection. I mean, it's a public space. It's a space of learning and active learning. It's a space of encounter and sharing, of conversation, what we're doing now. It's a space of real estate. It's a space of employment. I mean, it's a significant institution in the life of a city that does a lot of different things. And I think when we put an undue emphasis on the collection, you know, oftentimes, which a museum director doesn't necessarily control because their pace of acquisition is probably quite slow, they may not have a budget to acquire new works or whatever, we really cut off all the potential of museums in our society. I mean, no, I don't think everybody in the team needs to support every decision. I mean, it's not a, well, they kind of are dictatorships,
No,
but they...
If we talk about diversity, then I agree with you. Of course, there's so many dynamics and perspectives, but isn't it the collection or the exhibitions that are most visible if it concerns diversity? And
no, it's the building.
It's the building, okay.
Most money goes to the building, yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, sure, the collections or the exhibitions, but not necessarily. I mean, there can be, I mean, you can have an amazing exhibition of loaned work. I mean, it's neither here nor there. I mean, I think the bigger point that maybe you're making is that it's important for us to diversify our internal teams at the museum. I think there needs to be...
if that's necessary.
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really important to have more diversity in people in positions of power within the museum. And I think that when you have that, then you have a healthy debate within the museum about what you present and when you present. And it should be internal, and I think it should also be external.
Yeah.
And then I think you get the best of all worlds.
Yeah. You're quite outspoken about that, so that also means, obviously, that you've experiences whereby it wasn't the case. You don't have to mention names, but what then do you see if a team of people is very monogamous?
I mean, look at our team. Our team is totally homogeneous. I mean, we are most of our curatorial team are Western, white, middle class of our curatorial team. And I agree. I think that is a challenge, you know, to understand a diverse perspective. You know, but I think it's also then if you go more in the micro discussion, it's also when do you start diversity? For example, we had a photo, we did very proudly a photo of our team, and I put it on Facebook. And a friend of mine, an artist, he commented it and said, pretty white, he said. And I got what he meant, but I wanted to answer, yeah, but look, there's a fact, there's a quip, and there's a chick. It's a title by Jack Pearson, by a work where you see a homosexual, a woman, and a disabled person. So where, you know, I mean, how can he dare, in a way, I felt, I mean, he's a friend, and I see what he means, and I understand. But then we are really in the discussion, yeah, where does diversity start?
And I think we don't need to even, I mean, I think it's just boring if everyone thinks the same. I mean, I think we know in the history of art that the most interesting artists are the ones who think differently. And I think, you know, the reason why you want diversity is not because someone's told you to, but because it's better. It creates more interesting dynamics, it creates more interesting work, it raises more interesting questions.
You know, you're talking like a neoliberal person, because that's exactly what VW is telling us, and that's exactly what other big companies are telling us. Oh, be diverse, be more productive. I mean, I think it's also tricky to follow.
I didn't use the word productive. That would have been super neoliberal. I just said interesting. Wait a minute. We're not going to have an economics debate. We're going to talk about what is just interesting. I don't know. I think it's just funner. I mean, I think I think it's interesting that you use the word monogamous, which means something completely different. But I think that's quite interesting because it's not as sexy.
Heterogeneous, sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah.
you know, yeah.
Yeah, understand, yeah. A last question concerning this topic. If you are amongst other museum directors, so to speak, we know from your museum that you're quite, well, let's say you experiment a lot with trying to be diverse, so to speak. To what extent is that generally accepted? Are you preaching very new things, or is this something that a lot of museums already do?
What do you mean? I mean, do you mean the colleagues from other museums? Is that what you? Yeah, it's the trend, it's the fashion. You do this.
Okay.
So you can provocative say this.
Yeah.
My life is a trend.
I mean, you know, it's no, we don't like that. Is not a new discourse, or that is new. Still, it's that is not why we do it. So it's I feel it as a real urgency, and that's why we do it. But yeah, a lot of colleagues, that is like all the big institutions, like internationally. If you look at Tate, I always describe them as a Hoover. They go over the world and buy everywhere in the Middle East and Africa, and I envy them in a way. And at the same time, I'm aware. I mean, it's also a problem, because is it really making this institution more diverse? I would questioning, though they have a lot of artworks from great artists from all over the world.
I see.
Museums are painfully slow to change. We are just like the education system. I mean, it is just this giant, this sleeping giant, as we say, in the middle of our cities for no good reason. And the problem is that we're just going to become irrelevant. And I think the really important point about diversity, it's not people of a migrant background or people of color or minorities or whatever term you want to use who need museums. I mean, I'm sorry that we're fine, we're good. Mm-hmm. You just keep doing what you need. So this attitude of, come, we're finally going to show you here. Now you can find yourself here, and you should feel grateful, is like, no, you know, nobody cares. The point is that institutions need to be relevant to their societies, or they're closed down. The museums need us.
Yeah.
And we need to change that dynamic and understand it, I think, a little bit more profoundly.
To make it more practical, do you have an example whereby you say, well, that museum is definitely not a sleeping giant, but that is a museum that is extremely relevant if it comes to this? Because that would be helpful.
No, but I think a lot of museums are doing amazing work. I think this museum with the Museum Global exhibit is really starting to move in that direction, to open this up, to make this into a public space. I think that Yilmaz's museum sounds like they're doing amazing things. Yeah. So I think that by no means is nothing being done. But I think that institutionally, it's not really a choice. I mean, we have to move, and we're very slow to move. And I mean, Google's going to take over if we don't. I mean, come on. Like, I mean, I was reading that the biggest encounter that young people have of a new artwork is through Instagram now. Yeah. And I mean, I know that's a whole other debate, but the point is that museums are incredible, remarkable public places for encounter and discovery and knowledge. Yeah. And they will just be shut down if no one cares to come into them.
No, but the collectors will care, you know, they want their art to be exhibited.
Patrons.
Very, you know, the collectors and patrons are very on the same.
Yeah. I am wondering, are there any questions so far from the audience? Somebody who likes to ask something or not? Yeah, some questions. Maybe I can borrow the microphone for now. I'll just do 2 questions, and then we move on to the next subject. Yeah.
It's not really a question that I have, but I have a strange feeling, which is that somehow everybody supposes that the direction of the museum is to represent every kind of art, every kind of culture around the world. I think this is still there in the whole discussion, and I think it's basically wrong. Because the problem of diversity becomes, in this case, a problem of a post-colonialist attitude that is still there. if a museum thinks that it has to represent all the art all over the world, then it's a colonial institution for me. I think this kind of idea is wrong, you know. So I would always question more like, what kind of part in the world or the culture in the world can a museum represent, and where can it work on? If everybody tries to do everything, you're in the same position than some 100 years ago.
Yeah. Would you say museums now have the tendency maybe also to be a little bit too politically correct in that sense?
I think it's not a question of political correctness. I think it's a question of to check your own capacities. What can you do? So which kind of part of communication, culture can you take in the world, and forget this colonial position that you can represent everything in the world. I mean, that's the zoo system. A zoo tries to represent all the flora and fauna of the world. If we do that in culture, we are very far back. And what I really wonder is I still hear that in the background. Nobody's questioning that, because diversity starts not in the point where we do this, where we represent everything. It starts at this point where we can see also our limitations, I think, in the communication that we can do, and then come together with the fragments or the pieces that we can work on, and then get into a maybe global debate.
Yeah, indeed. Any reaction? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But I don't share the view that every museum has to have a universal collection by any stretch of the imagination. And I think some of the most interesting work is being done by city-based museums who have a very small collection. The Museum of Copenhagen, for example, you know, in all of their objects that they show, they have two different perspectives on the same object. And it can be, for example, a curator of some kind of wine carafe, and then a sommelier, for example, is just two completely different perspectives. So I think that a multiplicity of perspectives and diversity by no means you have to represent the world. Yeah. But I also want to take you up on your use of the word politically correct, because possibly you could define that, because I challenge you even using that word in this forum.
Well, we talked about it on the phone, that there is sometimes the thought with some museums that they have to do it almost for the sake of it. And if that's the case, then you're being politically correct. So I would say we need to prevent from getting there. But I don't know if that's something that you recognize.
Well, given the state of politics over like most of the world at the moment, who definitely is not supporting a position of diversity, I would just question the use of that term.
Yeah. No, but good that you underlined it. Yeah, yeah. There was another remark, I believe, as well. Yeah.
Hello. You said that museums needs to be relevant. But I think there are so many different perspectives what is relevant. And you thought, you make clear that it's important that there are a lot of different perspectives in a team. So if the team is diverse, there are more perspectives, so more opinion of what is relevant. But I still think that there are so many other perspectives. So if you say the curators are all over 30, and Western, or maybe there are people from other countries and continents. What about younger people, for example, or older people? I think if we follow this idea, then we need to think about participation. And I would like to know what kind of participation you would like to have for a museum, what kind of ideas you have.
Yeah, great comment. I completely agree. Because I think a lot of the time we're very internal in our conversations, and we pay lip service to audience, but we don't actually know nor speak to audiences. And I think that's a reason why a lot of contemporary art museums are extremely popular, is because the artists are creating more participative works. I was recently in Washington, D.C., and it was really interesting because there was an exhibit of an amazing artist whose name I don't remember, but it was really, really good. At the Hirshhorn, look it up. But it was completely participative, and it was a completely different demographic at that museum than some of the other Smithsonians, because I think people are tired of being told by whoever what to think and what to do.
Yeah. And thank you for the bridge to the next statement, because we go from the internal perspective, so to speak, to the external perspective. You already touched upon the topic, Ngaire, that we hardly ever consult with others, with other people, the visitors of the museum, on how a museum should look like, maybe. But before I go to you, maybe just to check with the audience, who would be in favor of that the audience should have a stronger voice in the process of setting up new art collections? Only 4 people? A few more? Can I maybe borrow? Madam, you were raising your hand. You are saying that indeed attendees, visitors of museums should have a stronger say.
Of course, I think so. I have a child, he's 15. I try to get him to the museums. He will never come. It's too boring. It's too stuck in things that he doesn't like because it's not up to date. It's not today things. Yeah. So it's not only that I think children are the visitors of the future. Yeah. And when we keep on a basis of, yes, what we have been doing, what we have been...
And who are we?
Be, sorry?
Who are we, if you're saying we?
I mean the... well, I mean the young people. Yeah. I mean the young people. We have to bring them to the museum. We have to bring something interesting, something where they can also act with the museum and be part of it, part of the collection and the exhibition. Yeah. Of course, today when I visit the museums, I say mostly there are not too young people, maybe from 30 up to, but it's most elderly people.
May I ask you, does your son show any interest on art on Instagram or Facebook or digitally, let's say?
Well, it's not my case, okay. But of course, I think it's also a thing of the times that we have to interact more with this kind of social things and to bring this somewhere somehow in communication with the exhibitions and the museum. But of course, we need also classical things. So
no, but your point is clear that the young people also, of course, need to be attracted to museums.
Of course, I think so, because it's the future, so you have
indeed.
to.
Young people and museums, that's an interesting theme. We can talk probably the entire evening about it, but just, Yilmaz, how do we interact with young people, with children?
To coming back what you said, I think it's also the danger to say, oh, we don't, you know, I think, yes, we need diversity, and I agree with you, it's not only about cultural diversity, but also diversity of age and different aspects, social status and so on. To be concrete, as an example, we have at the Museum Ludwig, we try to establish, and it's really hard work, a teen council, exactly with this idea that we are aware, even if we have some colleagues also in the curatorial team who are younger than 30 years, still they don't speak the language of your son, or like they don't have the same interest as a teen, for example, as young. So we try to establish this, and it's not only about their age, but it's also about their background, and we want to have younger people who would usually not come with their parents. We have a lot of actually young people in the museum. I think they're forced by the school, so there's a lot of, we have, as I said, a lot of young people, and they love to do workshops, and and I would also say, don't underestimate kids and young people. You don't need a mobile phone to get them into the museum. I think as an institution, you also have to think about your strength, and I think the strength of our institution is also that you have a different way of experience reality, that you may concentrate for a few minutes or even only a few seconds in front of, let's say, a classical painting or a sculpture, and not are distracted by something else. So I agree with you. I think we need to be more, as an institution, to be more open to also different generations. But at the same time, I'm not sure, you know, we're now working actually with Telecom, we're working on VR, virtual reality. And I'm very open and I want to understand and I think it's good for our institution. But at the same time, I'm very skeptical. I think a lot of young people like virtual reality. But at the same time, I'm skeptical because we also should think about our strengths or what makes us as an institution different to other field of experience you have.
Yeah, so it's a balance, you would say, Yilmaz.
I also think, I mean, what we're seeing a lot of trends in is a healthy skepticism of many of the young generations in the world of authority, of what constitutes authority. So I think when we talk about participation, it's not necessarily like gadgets. It's not like necessarily so we can play. But it's mainly because I'd like to have an experience with this artwork that's not mediated by someone that I don't necessarily trust. And I think that is something that we need to take seriously. When you talk about voting, for example, I mean, we have a lot of young people who are politically active, but maybe not in the same way as the other generation. There's more a call for some direct action. When we talk about art, people want to experience it in a different way. When we talk about history, people want to go to it in a different way. And so I think it's really a comment on who gets to mediate that experience. And how much trust do young people have around that mediating body, more than this idea of participation because it's funner or because it requires less, because it's more technology or it requires, you know, less focus.
Yeah. Okay. There was also no reaction anymore. Yeah, sir. It's already on.
Okay, ich möchte auf Deutsch sprechen. Ich würde gerne nochmal anknüpfen an das, was Markus Ambach gesagt hat. Also, dass Diversität eben zunächst mal auch zu tun hat mit dem sich auseinandersetzen mit den eigenen Beschränkungen. Ich glaube auch mit den eigenen blinden Flecken. Insofern ist das nicht notwendigerweise eine bewusste Auseinandersetzung, sondern eine, die aber auch darauf hinweist, dass das Museum eine extrem hierarchisch geprägte Institution ist. Und dass aus dieser Art der Organisation natürlich auch eine bestimmte Art, auch in der Tradition unseres Faches Kunstgeschichte, eine bestimmte Art zu denken hervorgeht. Und dass das natürlich auch sich auswirkt auf, ich würde sagen, auf den Umgang mit Andersheit. Also Subjekt-Objekt-Dichotomien, die den anderen zunächst mal auf selbstverständlich empfundene Weise zurichten. Ja, den anderen, das andere zu objektivieren. Und jetzt sind wir aber eigentlich in einer anderen Situation. Wenn man Diversität ernst nimmt, dann würde ich sagen, dann muss man auch das hierarchische Konzept der Museen in Frage stellen. Und dann würde das bedeuten, wahrscheinlich 30% weniger Output, weil wir sozusagen jetzt neu verhandeln müssen. Das erleben wir auch als freie Vermittlerinnen und Vermittler hier in diesem Museum, dass plötzlich eine Öffnung der Kuratoren stattfindet und wir so etwas anders versuchen. Das heißt aber, es braucht Zeit, ja, der sozusagen auf Kosten des Output geht und aber gleichzeitig so etwas hineinholt wie eine Selbstverständlichkeit für das Unterwegssein im Offenen. Ohne dass man das schon zu irgendwas machen könnte. Und das ist ja vielleicht auch genau das Richtige, wenn es um Kunst geht, davon eben auszugehen. Also ich würde sagen, es geht auch um die Art und Weise der Konstitution unseres Denkens, das essentialistisch und identitär geprägt ist, von Subjekt-Objekt-Dichotomien gekennzeichnet ist und wie wir von diesem Standpunkt aus Andersheit sozusagen auf andere Weise damit umgehen können. Wir hatten neulich mal eine Tagung, letzter Satz, zu der Frage, wem gehört das Museum? Und für mich war die Einlassung von Brache-Ettinger mit dem Stichwort Matrixalität, matrixiale Transjektivität, gehörte zu den interessantesten Äußerungen auf dieser Tagung.
Ja, okay. if I understand it correctly with my German, but I think the most important thing that you're addressing is the hierarchical structure of a lot of museums, and with it, the challenge to also have the voice of others into the process of coming up with...
And also the tradition of Western thinking, Western art history.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Maybe Yilmaz, you would like to react to that.
I got the point. I mean, but I mean, maybe to provoke you, I don't really believe in democratic. I think that the democratic attitude in the art field not always works that I'm interested in. I mean, and I'm aware of this, and I hope through this awareness I'm actually more open for participatorial approaches and everything. But at the same time, I think there's also, I mean, I'm not by chance the director of this institution, and my colleagues are not by chance the expert in their field. So we have to find, you know, how to combine this actually knowledge and expertise, which I value and which I like, to combine this with, you know, an openness and an awareness and an urgency to do things differently. Yeah. I wouldn't give up what you in German called, and I think it's an awful word, but it describes something, Hoheitswissen, so because it describes already a hierarchy and everything. But I hope I am, and I'm pretty aware that my colleagues are aware that when they do decisions, they have a responsibility. We are publicly paid. We are, you know, we have a responsibility opposite to the public. But I think it's really, for me, and would be interesting what you say. For me, the solution can't be. Or I wouldn't be interested. Of course, it can be. Now everyone participates and can do. And puts their art in the museum and do the program there. I mean, it would maybe an interesting idea to follow. But at the same time, I think there are also valuable knowledge, or there is something which I would not want, and it's not about me, but I think as a general construct. I would feel it's not productive to totally, you know, neglect this, or, you know, we can do everything.
Your point is clear. So you're saying you're not saying that democracy is not something that you don't want. Of course, you are in favor of that. But if I translate it very freely, you also need to be a bit rebelistic. For instance, if you're a fashion designer, if you first are going to check with everybody, do you like this, do you like this, do you like this, then you end up with nothing. But you, from your position and together with your team, it also needs sometimes that you are extremely outspoken in decisions, no?
Well, I mean, I'm not in favor of democracy all the time either, especially not in my home. But I think... I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I think that it's sort of how we're approaching this a little bit that's sitting uneasily with me. I mean, there's been a system of very selective selection so far in many of the museums in the West, and they favored white rich men very explicitly for a long time. And favored curators with a particular perspective also for some time. Switching that up a little bit is not necessarily a free-for-all or a threat to quality or a threat to anything, frankly. It's just different. It's just recognizing that there's a lot of systemic things in place that give us the knowledge and the experiences that we have right now.
Yeah.
I don't think museums need to all operate on a participatory basis. I think that trying to find new forms of institutional management that aren't the strict hierarchies and silos is not necessarily a bad idea. I think that many, many institutions in our society are grappling with those same issues. I think technology and data present many challenges that enable us to be creative in new ways of making decisions. But I think that all of those things can coexist.
Yeah.
It's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, oh my God, we're going to have diversity, which means that the museum's not going to exist, and there's going to be all these unqualified people running around, and then the riffraff is going to come in, and oh dear God, what are we going to do? I mean, I think, there is a middle ground.
Yeah. No, but and an applause from the back. Yeah. No, it's scary change in general, and it's nice that you give this nuance, because then it becomes a little bit less scary. So that's important, yeah. I would like to move on to the last statement. I'm having a hate-love relationship with the laptop tonight, so maybe, Sandra, would you put up the last statement from the laptop? Sorry for that, guys. Because if we look into the future, the role of musea in public debate, so to speak, we can have one slide further, I would say, because I would like to bring up the last statement, which is museums can take up a stronger role in the public debate if it concerns a diverse society. So if we look to the roles of museums and the future, then they can have a stronger role in the public debate about diversity. Who agrees with that? And there is a hand all the way in the back that I'd like to, because there was a very enthusiastic hand, and I love enthusiastic hands, because they often have a lot of passion behind them. And then I'm referring to you.
Ich habe jetzt ganz spontan geantwortet, auf jeden Fall. Und ich wollte auch nochmal anknüpfen an das, was vorher Thema war. Wenn es um Partizipation geht, hat man immer sowas von alles oder nichts. Ne? Wenn du von Hoheitswissen sprichst, es heißt ja nicht, wenn du anfängst mit anderen zu sprechen, dass du deine Position aufgibst, sondern dass du deine eigene Position oder die deiner Kollegen oder wem auch immer zur Debatte stellst, so, und dann passieren interessante Sachen. Und ich finde auf jeden Fall, dass Museen durch die Arbeit, die sie tun, eine stärkere gesellschaftliche Position einnehmen könnten. Auf jeden Fall.
Ja.
Also unstrittig.
Would you say that right now they have a too soft voice in the public debate?
Würde ich schon sagen. Also
Ja.
ich finde auch Ausstellungen sind zu wenig, also das ist das, was ich auch vor allem kritisiere. Ausstellungen sind zu fade. Also ich vermisse das, was du sagst. Also ich finde das auch in deinen Ausstellungen. Es ist jetzt nicht so, dass ich das gar nicht finden kann, aber das, was du erzählst, wie eine Ausstellung entsteht bei euch, also ich vermisse wirklich sowas, eine größere Schärfe in Ausstellungen und nicht, ach ja, Abramowitsch, Bundeskunsthalle, ja.
Okay. Yeah. Another reaction? What did you say, sir? Do you agree with this statement or not?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
Ich würde auch lieber Deutsch
Das ist gut,
sprechen.
ja.
Ich möchte auch gerne auf das Statement von eben nochmal zurückkommen. Ich glaube, wir müssen eine Sache wir müssen unterscheiden zwischen der Absicht zu informieren, vielleicht in einer Vielfalt und was es alles gibt und dass das also neu und spannend und alles Mögliche, und einer gewissen didaktischen Möglichkeit. Es ist ja durchaus so, dass eine gute Ausstellung einen bereichern kann. Und das bedeutet, dass sie intellektuell durchdacht sein muss und das auch vermitteln kann oder muss und mit allem, was dazugehört. Und ich glaube, das geht ist bisher in unserer Diskussion ein bisschen verloren gegangen, dass es eben tatsächlich eben einen didaktischen Auftrag geben kann oder sollte sogar, und darauf könnte man auch stolz sein, denn das ist ja nicht undemokratisch, sondern es ist ja nicht nur ein Ausstellen seines eigenen Expertentums, sondern es ist ja der Impetus zu anderen Leuten etwas mitzuteilen, was sie vielleicht noch nicht gesehen haben.
Ja.
Und ich glaube, das ist also ein Punkt, den wir bei der Diskussion von Museen auch etwas mehr berücksichtigen sollten.
But if you have a more a collection with more participation and more democratic, let's say, would you then say it's less intellectual and less didactional?
No, it's a question how you present it and to accept an audience, which also is not just all the same, but very differentiated, and you have somehow to find how to bring them to a better state.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Is there something you'd like to react on the things that have been said so far? Yeah. So valuable contributions, I believe, here, madam.
I'm thinking, since you were talking about the big outreach programs in the United States and the small outreach programs in Germany, about the difference that we make between outreach and research, and the dividing kind of the. It's interesting what you said about the idea of an exhibition that has to be understood by the audience, and I think that's very right. And the better the idea is, the more the audience can understand it. And I think the secret heart of participation is bringing the best artists together with the audience. And I think it would help to less divide outreach in terms of kind of marketing programs and research and kind of we are the intellectual specialists. I think it needs to have new wild ways of mixing good art with the world around us, and it's very it can be very fascinating, I think, and be a great experience. And it's not about democracy or participation, but it's about having a kind of trust also in the audience.
And can you then formulate your question?
Yeah, how do you divide this, and what could this be in the future? Not dividing it. It's a real question, because I know from dance that the biggest effect in the 80s in Great Britain was when really big artists went into schools. They were forced to go. That's not the way I think you can solve it, and they were doing things nobody could learn in 30 minutes. But the influence of the effect of doing a pirouette in a school class was incredible, and leading kids to want to be a dancer. So I think there is something of the direct way art can influence the people that should be more in between the art view and the pedagogic view, or whatever you call it.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a special mediator role. No? No.
I think it's actually documented that arts education is a predictor for museum attendance. Arts education is a huge predictor for participation in the arts. The more you have access to art in schools, which is why it's extremely important to have that link between schools and museums, or you have arts programs in schools that are funded and accessed, the higher levels of participation you have in terms of art. Yeah, and I think your points about outreach are well made. I'm not American, and I didn't talk about U.S. outreach. I find it very funny. Every time I speak, everyone starts talking about American museums. My accent is from Canada, and I've actually worked very little in the U.S., and the U.S. is a huge outlier as far as the whole museum discussion is concerned. But I think I take the point around, outreach, public programming, those kinds of works. Also, an incredibly important interface between a museum's research and the museum institution and the broader society.
Yeah, I think you addressed several topics, and I just want to relate to one, and that is, I think there is still, and I think with this exhibition, you mentioned it, that it changed a bit, I think it is already questionable that you divide between the curatorial part and the educational part, and I think that is already questionable. And I think here with this Museum Global, especially in the space we're sitting now, as far as I understood, that like the departments were very close and informed each other, and that's something what I would be very much interested in, and what the gentleman over there was saying, it takes more time, of course. The more people you involved from the team or involving people from outside, like we see it with the teen council, it takes more time, but it's well invested time, I would say.
Do
Yeah.
you want to address this question?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I think that there really isn't, I mean, there may be a debate about a diverse society, but it's kind of already happening, so there's not much to debate about. I think that museums can be a forum for more debate, but I think European museums can really help people talk about whiteness. I think that's where the problem lies, quite frankly. I think that museums that have largely white staff and a largely white public can help white people deal with diversity, which is a totally different thing. And I think that you know, I mean, I think this exhibition here today goes some way to do that. But I think that is a really important role to play, because I think here in Europe we're afraid of. I don't know what's happening at the moment, but I mean, there's definitely something that needs to be talked about. I'm not sure whether it's like diversity. I think more it's about homogeneity. We need to talk about it, and about Western civilization, and about what does Europe mean. And I think that museums are absolutely a proper forum and a physical space for that kind of discussion.
I would agree also in the sense of that we are not, I mean, we don't have to have an outcome in a way which a lot of other institutions, I mean, I say this and I'm aware that my politicians ask me how many visitors do you have, how much press did you have, and so on. Still, I would insist that an institution in opposite to, let's say, international company who also will claim for diversity, I would say for different reasons maybe, we do not have to have an outcome, and that also privileged us as an institution to answer your question up there with yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to show that I'm not like a neoliberal puppet, I think that one of the most important things that museums have to preserve is that they're public spaces for conversation. And that's getting increasingly rare. Yeah. I think we're having a whole privatization of our cities, of our public spaces, of our internet. And I think that museums, as largely public institutions, need to preserve the sanctity of the space of public debate.
I think you had beautiful closing words to both of you. There doesn't necessarily need to be an outcome. It's an evolution. We also spoke about that. But I think it is important that we have constant awareness. And I think that, well, tonight was an example of that. Very practical. How will your day tomorrow look like, Yilmaz, going forward?
Exactly. No, I mean, that is also the thing. I mean, this is not the first time that I and also the team is thinking about this question. But I myself wouldn't underestimate the experience I had today. So that will have an impact. Yeah. But it's part, this day today is part of a whole development I'm concerned with, but also my colleagues and also I think society in general. So I think, or I hope, maybe I'm naive or too optimistic, but I think things will change.
Yeah, good. You have some last words. What are your takeaways from today?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me what I was going to do tomorrow. And
well,
I was like,
that
hang out with
results
the
in what you're going.
and then I'm going to.
That results in what you're going to do tomorrow, I guess. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's been a lot of very fruitful discussions, and I really have the utmost respect for the people, for all of you, for coming out, and for the people that we spoke to this afternoon, who I think are grappling with very real challenges on the ground. I don't think it's easy, so I'm energized, and I say courage, continue, and have a good evening.
Can I have a warm applause for Yilmaz and for Ngaire, please? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So give your hands. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So thank you so much for attending this evening, and especially for your contribution in German and English. Very good. And we hope to see you next time, because I also look to Ines. I believe there will be a follow-up discussion eve as well in January. Yeah? So keep an eye on the website, and then hopefully see you next time again. Have a wonderful rest of the evening.